Hi everyone, this is Jet Schlackman. For this video I'll be speaking of power and control or domination agendas both in personal relationships and in society as a whole, looking at some of the psychological dynamics that fuel these polarities that feed into these patterns in our experience. And to start, we're going to look at what happens when we're young children and our immediate authority figures, primarily the parents or caregivers, are behaving in these power abusing types of ways. So at that young age, we naturally want to bond or attach to our parents, to those authority figures in our life. Having that bond or attachment brings us some sense of security or safety, even if that person is treating us in a fairly abusive way. So we may in some sense try to normalize that abuse, to tell or convince ourselves that it's okay or acceptable in some way, so that we can maintain that attachment or bond with that caregiver. Of course, there's usually a part of our consciousness that's in some way resisting that abuse, even though on a surface or conscious level we may be convincing ourselves that it's okay. So on a more subconscious and emotional level, we're feeling violated, we're feeling in some manner disrespected or devalued, we're feeling that we've been abused or harmed by that behavior, but we may suppress or repress that awareness just so that we can feel secure, so that we can be accepted in that relationship and maintain that bond or attachment. So that creates kind of this primal split in one's consciousness. A person can have that one aspect that actually seeks to appease the abuser, to follow along with them, to gain their approval, even if that means supporting them in their abusive behavior. While there's another part of us that's angry and upset about being abused or dominated, and which desires actually to reclaim our personal power, our sense of control. What often happens is that at some point, sooner or later, that part of the personality that wants to reclaim power, that wants to have a sense of control, will take on an abusive role itself as it seeks to control and dominate others to gain its sense of power or its sense of security. So you can see all different types of extremes in people's behavior, these types of polarization of people's personality and how they respond to and treat other people around them. It's not unusual for a person to exhibit both polarities, where there are times that person appears to be super nice and kind and pleasant and seeking to be appreciated by others, approved by others. So someone who acts kind of super sweet, who presents this very people-pleasing type of facade, while they may have a hidden or suppressed side that sometimes pops out, which is actually very hostile, very controlling and dominating toward others. It's not very nice at all. So one polarity extreme tends to feed the other, and they can both exist in one person. Keep in mind that creation is always seeking to teach us about balance. So for every positive, there's a negative, and so on. Now, in other cases where a person at a young age is abused and mistreated by their caregivers or authority figures, they may not really attempt to bond at all with those caregivers. They may become very emotionally detached, very disconnected in some sense, so they might appear emotionally withdrawn, very isolated or reserved, very quiet. So they may avoid socialization and just kind of keep to themselves. They may not seek out approval from people around them. They may kind of maintain their own inner world and use that to comfort themselves in some way. So that's another possibility for how someone might deal with that issue of being abused or dominated by authority figures. In that scenario, the person is continuing kind of in a state of disempowerment where they're not willing to express themselves or assert themselves in social settings or circumstances. So that person may appear very anxious, very fearful, very insecure with being around other people or asserting themselves when they're with other people. If we look at the broader social or collective dynamics of these issues, we can see how people may be responding to the abusive, domineering, or controlling actions of societal authority figures. So it could be in a workplace, it could be in some type of club or organization where there's a hierarchy, where certain people have positions of power or influence. You'll often find that there are many people who actually go along with very abusive, very antisocial types of behaviors by those who are in the leadership positions because they don't want to lose their position in the group. So people kind of kiss up to those who are in power because they want to get some piece of that power or influence. They want to be accepted. They want to be allowed into this social group, into this social clique, you might call it. So they're needing that feeling of acceptance or belonging in that social construct, and they'll go along with abusive behavior in order to receive that approval or sense of belonging. A common example of this that many people would think of is gangs, where people join a gang to have that sense of family or belonging, where they feel accepted or a part of that group, even though the group is engaging in a variety of antisocial behaviors. It's abusing the society around them, and it's often very abusive or domineering toward its own members, its own followers, so to speak. Yet many people are continuing to be a part of that culture, continuing to go along with it. And this doesn't just happen with common street gangs per se. This happens with many larger organizations that we would think contain people who are more mature and educated and sophisticated. So you'll find various cult-type organizations which operate with that psychological dynamic. You'll find political organizations, you'll find corporations and other institutions So people will allow themselves to be influenced and manipulated to serve the interests of those who are very controlling and domineering and abusive, because they perceive they're getting some type of security or social benefit from playing along and accepting those conditions. I encourage each of you to closely examine your own personal relationships, your families, the groups and organizations and workplaces that you've been a part of, and of course to look at the broader societal phenomena, political and institutional phenomena, corporate organizations, non-governmental organizations, structures in the healthcare system, in science and academia and so on, where there are people in the leadership and power positions who are exploiting and manipulating others, who are pushing their own agendas, and who are getting other people to cooperate and comply and follow along. So you have this kind of big, grand social dynamic that leads these situations to persist. It's not that there are just these few people who are abusive and domineering and antisocial who are actually controlling the whole society. It's that all the people around them, or in a sense at least most of the people around them, have psychological weaknesses and polarizations that lead them to play a part to support this whole collective drama. So there are other people who are also antisocial, who come together for common interests, who work together perhaps to manipulate others for their mutual benefit. And then there are all the people that are subservient, who acquiesce, who allow themselves to be led or misled or manipulated, to be brought along in these systems to keep things going the way they are going. So until collectively the society starts to heal and shift and people find more of an inner balance where people address their own unresolved issues related to power and control that they've carried perhaps from their childhood, from their ancestry, from other lifetimes even, then all these dynamics just continue to play out, to repeat themselves. So I hope that this discussion gives each of you some insight into your own personal lives and the world around you, into the collective dramas that we may see unfolding around us, and that it inspires you to work on your own personal healing, your own personal integration, in creating more balance within your own being and your own personality, so that you're not split or fragmented, so that you're not going back and forth between being too much of a follower or enabler of abusive behaviors, and you're not also in some way becoming the domineering or controlling person who feels unsafe or insecure if you're not forcing other people or manipulating them in some way to comply with your agenda. I appreciate each of you for taking your time to view this video. I would invite you to watch some other videos on my channel that cover similar topics that address personal growth, spirituality, and holistic health. For now, I also invite you to view my website, which is phinsights.com, which is focused on holistic health and healing resources and the services that I provide. I'd like to wish each of you a wonderful day. Namaste.